Ukrainian drones ripped deep into Russia like lightning. Explosions rocked the enemy's territory, sowing chaos and fear. The Kremlin is in total shock. Putin's air defense failed, leaving Russian positions in ruins. Crimea is collapsing. Russian fortifications are crumbling to dust, one after another. The occupiers are desperately trying to hold on, but the final strike is inevitable. The peninsula is hanging by a thread, and the thread is about to snap. Russian mercenaries are losing ground, running for their lives, scattering like rats across the fields of Sumy. Near Dobropillia and Novopavlivka, Russian forces are trapped in deadly encirclements. Panic is spreading, morale is collapsing, and the remnants of their army are fleeing in shame. Ukraine's defenders are showing once again the enemy is doomed. The endgame has begun. Shocking explosions, secret arsenals, collapsing Russian defenders, and the final reckoning. Romania has stunned the entire world. Bucharest reveals its hidden power, launching massive support for Ukraine and openly standing against Moscow. Putin is in panic as a new arsenal is prepared, ready to crush his army on the front lines. Meanwhile, Russia is out of options. No tanks, no weapons, no supplies. Soldiers are sent into battle with empty hands. And now China is ready to shut off the last pipeline of weapons. The so-called Second Army of the world is bleeding out, and it gets worse for the Kremlin. Foreign volunteers are flooding into Ukraine. All of it exposed in our special edition of Hotspot. Our forces have hit the real jackpot. Ukrainian sea drones have slipped deep inside Russia. Fast as lightning, they delivered a massive blow to Putin's troops. Russian air defense completely missed the moment, and then the drones smashed enemy territory with powerful air strikes. Even the Kremlin admitted it. Russian soldiers are now firing directly at residential buildings. This is the beginning of a collapse, and it's all on video. You have to see these explosive one-in-a-lifetime shots first.
The AVRF movement is becoming more and more large-scale.
Don't stand in the way. Don't hesitate. Evacuate immediately.
Just in the past few days, drones have attacked several Russian ports at once. In particular, they struck the Black Sea Fleet in Novorossiysk, according to Russian media reports. First, surface drones hit the port, and a couple of hours later, the city center was attacked.
As long as there's no official report of damage, it's all just a violation of safety regulations. Someone's smoking in the swamps, even at sea.
As a result of the attack, the operation of the Transneft oil complex and the Caspian Pipeline Consortium terminal near Novorossiysk was paralyzed. At the same time, 120 kilometers away in Sochi, a threat was also reported. Tourists began to be evacuated from the beaches due to the threat of surface drones.
Don't stand in the middle. Don't get your feet wet. Evacuate immediately. Everyone get into the water.
The commotion was met at the port of Tuapse. An oil terminal was attacked there. This was also the work of surface drones. A video appeared online where you can hear bursts of gunfire and explosions, as well as see attempts to hit maneuvering objects on the water.
The drone approaches the pier and strikes despite being fired upon, apparently by automatic cannons and machine guns, judging by the splashes around the drone.
As we can see, unsuccessfully. One of the largest oil transshipment terminals in Russia has been hit.
This step is quite logical, quite expected after the strikes on oil refineries and the destruction of installations vital to these plants. It is already known that Russia is experiencing certain difficulties with fuel, with diesel fuel, and with gasoline. And on top of that, significant strikes on the crucial export gateways of those very same major oil and gas companies will also undoubtedly cause the Russians quite a few extremely unpleasant moments and considerable difficulties.
The transshipment points in Tuapse and Novorossiysk together could export 2 million barrels of crude oil daily. This means that even a single day of shutdown results in huge losses for the Russians.
The regime finds itself in a very difficult situation from an economic standpoint. It is highly dependent on exports, specifically the export of fossil fuels, lubricants, and oil products. This export channel is used to obtain foreign currency revenue, which is then used to finance the military machine. Right now, this is painful. It's not just that exports of certain products are being reduced by percentages or even tenths of percent, but it's also affecting oil production itself. And this could potentially trigger a far-reaching and devastating domino effect, where such precisely targeted strikes, multiplied exponentially by the thousands across various critical sectors, could inevitably lead to what Mr. Pramp vividly called the paper tiger, a seemingly formidable but ultimately fragile entity, simply and utterly collapsing under the immense and sustained pressure.
And there are also less obvious consequences. After each of these attacks, Russians are increasingly convinced that air defense systems don't protect them, but on the contrary, pose an even greater threat. The inaccurate fire from Russian military forces has led to the destruction of residential buildings, the loss of several cars, and has caused panic among locals. There are also reports of several fatalities, and the media is hinting that the air defense systems are to blame. For example, in Novorossiysk, there was an order not to publish the aftermath of drone strikes, but everything is shown on television anyway. This means that the burned cars and the strikes on house roofs are actually the result of the air defense systems, not the drones.
Right now, our forces are mowing down the enemy in droves. Putin has gone completely insane, sending soldiers into battle practically barehanded. But Ukraine's fierce revenge catches up with them instantly. Near Dobropillia, a deadly cauldron is closing in, and near Dobropavlivka, total annihilation. What's left on Russia's army is fleeing desperately from Sumy region, terrified of being thrown into the frontline meat grinder. Our defenders are showing the enemy they are doomed. What aces has the Ukrainian army just played? We'll reveal it in our next report.
They are suffering enormous losses, but still keep pushing forward without any results. The Russian army still hasn't given up hope of seizing at least a small piece of new Ukrainian territory. In the past 24 hours, there have been nearly 200 combat clashes recorded on the front line. The Russian invaders are most active in the Pokrovsk and Novopavlivka directions. Across the entire front line, the enemy carried out 81 airstrikes, dropping 156 guided aerial bombs on Ukraine. Also in the past 24 hours, the enemy conducted 5,118 shellings and launched more than 6,000 drones at Ukrainians.
Donetsk region, right now our fighters are working at maximum capacity there, especially drone operators in Donetsk Oblast. Although it should be noted that the concentration of enemy aircraft over Donetsk is also just sky high. Sometimes there are simply 3 or 4 aircraft patrolling at a time, and now it's happening 24/7.
While the occupiers were striking indiscriminately at peaceful cities and shopping centers, our aviation targeted exclusively military facilities of the Russian army. In particular, the armed forces of Ukraine carried out a high-precision strike on the occupiers' positions in Donbass. According to Ukrainian intelligence, enemy infantry was stationed in 2 of the buildings, and the entire personnel of the occupiers' 3rd Army Corps was sent to a concert for Kopson. Meanwhile, in the Pokrovsk direction, our defenders were not hunting Russian infantry, but rather targeting the enemy's expensive heavy equipment. Despite all the crew's efforts, the enemy tank was unable to escape from our drones. Overall, in the Pokrovsk direction, Ukrainian defenders have repelled around 60 assaults by the Russian aggressor in the past 24 hours near the settlements of Vladimirovka, Nikonorovka, Krasny Liman, Sukhetskaya, Novoekonomicheskaya, Nikolaevka, Lisovka, Zvereva, Kotlina, Udakhnaya, Novonikolaevka, Kotliarovka, and Dakhnaya. All enemy attempts to attack the Ukrainian armed forces in the Sumy region were completely thwarted. In the past 24 hours, Russian forces carried out 6 attacks in the Kupiansk direction. Ukrainian defenders repelled enemy assault actions near the settlement of Petropavlovka and towards Peshchanoy and Boguslavka. There, and not only there, the enemy has started using a new monstrous tactic. In order to save resources, Kremlin generals have begun sending their soldiers into attacks without armor or proper gear.
The enemy understands everything perfectly well and is betting on the speed of their movement, lightness, mobility, and so on. That's why, as has been observed more than once, they run to the outskirts and then start searching and looting their fallen comrades. There they pick up body armor, helmets, and so on.
In this manner, the enemy stormed the positions of the Ukrainian armed forces in the Lyman direction a total of 15 times, trying to break through the defenses near the settlements of Kolodets and Torsky. But on the Dobropillia direction, the enemy is no longer eager to attack. There, on the contrary, they are desperately trying to break out of the encirclement.
Here, on the Dobropillia direction, the assault regiments have indeed carried out these encirclements, cutoffs, or the creation of pockets for the occupiers where the so-called Z-War correspondents are fighting. Although, as they say, it's not that simple, and in some locations, the physical expulsion of the enemy is still ongoing. It's still too early to speak of a complete encirclement of the enemy there.
Thanks to the coordination and prompt actions of our defenders, several hundred Russian occupiers were trapped in an improvised pocket, according to the General Staff, and even more invaders were eliminated during the recent battles. The military reports this.
Wherever there is an enemy and wherever he is cut off from supplies, this covers about 300 square kilometers of territory. Now they are spreading towards the Dobropillia direction. According to Zelensky, the losses of the occupiers in this operation have already reached almost 3,000 people, most of whom are irrecoverable. The replenishment of the exchange fund is also ongoing. According to the president, this is what is happening in the north.
Meanwhile, in the east, our border guards continue to terrorize the occupiers. The day before, they managed to set a new record by neutralizing as many as 60 Russian soldiers with drones in a single day. And here, border guards from the Phoenix unit are already striking at the enemy's logistics in the Donetsk region. As a result of the drone raid, our defenders managed to destroy at least 3 motorcycles, a quad bike, a car, and 2 Russian army vans all at once. Among the high-value targets were a truck loaded with ammunition and a T-80 tank. The drone systems unit also showed off the results of their work over the weekend. The day before, they struck 3 gas distribution stations in the temporarily occupied territory of Luhansk region, which caused disruptions in the area.
Water is barely dripping from the tap. The blue fuel in the gas stove isn't so blue anymore, and soon, who knows, the chandelier might freeze. So that's what happiness looks like, right before your eyes and stings. The Shchastia gas distribution station in Luhansk region, on the temporarily occupied territory of Ukraine, is the main gas source for the Luhansk TPP. The Luhansk TPP was forced to switch to operating on coal.
But even beyond the border, the occupiers can't hide from the Ukrainian armed forces and their drones. The proof of this is a new one. A high-profile SBU operation, security service drones destroyed the Tingovatovo oil pumping station in the Chuvash Republic of the Russian Federation, thousands of kilometers from Ukraine. It is known that the station's operations have been temporarily suspended until the extent of the damage to the facility is determined. However, according to rumors, the enterprise will halt its operations for a very long time.
Sensation! Almost for the first time ever, Romania stunned the world with an unexpected move. The real secret cardinal has been exposed. A full-on course of total support for Ukraine is underway right now. A massive joint production is being rolled out. On top of that, Bucharest has put in drones squarely in its sights. Russia is being squeezed. The front is trembling at the common reckoning. What kind of arsenal is primed for total destruction? We'll reveal all in the report. Don't miss it.
Since the start of the full-scale invasion, Romania has provided a significant number of defense aid packages, but it does not officially disclose either the quantities or the detailed list of the supplied weaponry.
At the beginning of the full-scale war, the key priority was to obtain more Soviet-made weaponry, or let's say, weaponry that was produced by the Russian Federation, since that made up the lion's share of Ukraine's arsenal and didn't require extra time for additional training. So yes, Romania stepped in to lend a hand here as well.
It seemed like a logical decision. The Russians would have less information about what weapons the Ukrainian military has and in what quantities. But now Romania's position has started to change, and soon all this information might be made public.
Regularly, constantly, since the beginning of the war, Romania has been helping Ukraine with both equipment and ammunition. Until now, the decision was made not to disclose this. This is a discussion that we will have between the government and the president to determine how we will act in the future, but I think such things need to be voiced.
Pro-Russian forces in Romania are still strong, and they will use, twist, and manipulate any information related to the Russian-Ukrainian war, supporting, let's say, right-wing, ultra-right forces, as well as revanchists who want to restore relations with the Russian Federation.
Romania has likely supplied small arms and ammunition, artillery, and armored personnel carriers. There have also been media reports about the supply of MiG-29 aircraft and T-72 tanks.
We are helping with Soviet weapons and ammunition from our stockpiles. We provided the Patriot system. We are providing significant economic and humanitarian assistance. We are training F-16 pilots. Officers of the Romanian army are training Ukrainian soldiers. We help Ukraine every day.
Romania, if you remember, agreed to transfer one Patriot system to us. That's quite significant as well, because if you look, how many European countries have given us their Patriot systems? Very few. But Romania agreed to do it.
Romania also reportedly received a proposal from Ukraine to establish joint production of Neptune missiles, but declined. At the same time, according to the Romanian side, they have agreed with Ukraine on the joint construction of a drone manufacturing plant.
The experience of the Ukrainian front has shown that drones play a fantastic role in the defense industry. A downed helicopter causes much more damage than a downed drone. The idea of partnering with Ukraine to produce these drones in Romania emerged. But until the commercial and legal terms are established, I can't tell you anything.
The Neptune project is currently on hold, and as for the drones, it has been postponed until 2026 in order to accumulate, let's say, yes, quite a large investment sum.
Romanian President Dan previously stated that the country is not ready to send peacekeepers to Ukraine, but is ready to help in every other way it can.
We, like some other countries, will not send a contingent to Ukraine after a possible peace or ceasefire, but we will support the logistics and supply of peacekeeping operations at our bases.
When our maritime area was essentially closed, Romania gave Ukraine significant support, and through its ports, like Constanța, for example, a large amount of Ukrainian exports passed under the NATO umbrella. Romania has consistently proven itself to be a truly reliable and steadfast ally, one that perhaps doesn't always talk as much as some others, but, well, it certainly takes decisive action.
Also, in light of recent incidents involving Russian drones entering their territory, the Romanian authorities are currently only considering options for how to shoot them down.
This happens from time to time when drones fly over a small area of Romania. In the past few days, pilots received approval to shoot down a drone, but after analyzing the situation, they determined there could be risks to the population, so they followed the drone until it left Romanian airspace.
So how can you understand, well, what is the purpose of the drone entering, say, specifically Romania? I don't know, and no one knows. But last time, the drone flew along the Romanian border for 50 minutes, an hour. In those 50 minutes, it surveyed all the critical infrastructure, all the port infrastructure. It gathered more data, in fact, than any intelligence agency operating in Romania could have collected. And there are more than enough of those there as well. So that's it, yes, and they finished, and the drone, you could say, peacefully left Romanian territory and took all the intelligence data with it.
In the end, people in Romania believe that if Ukrainians saw how much weaponry and aid they had actually provided to Ukraine, the percentage of Ukrainians with a positive attitude toward their country might increase.
Russia is on the verge of total collapse. Putin is quietly weeping inside the Kremlin. The occupiers are desperately trying to hold the line, but it's useless. Tanks are almost gone, and a brutal shortage of weapons is chaining down the Russian army, pushing it into sheer madness. Could the donkeys really be back in play? And to make matters worse, China may tighten the tap on arms supplies. Russians are being left with nothing. What other shocking failures of Russia's military-industrial complex have been exposed? We'll find out in just a moment.
Russian tanks are on the verge of extinction. It seems the Russian military-industrial complex can't keep up, and soon there may be nothing left to fight with at all. And apparently, sanctions are to blame for this.
The role of sanctions here is more about the fact that these are streams, these are sufferings, a worsening situation where there is a certain gap in which Russia is operating, and it significantly slows down the implementation of technologies like artificial intelligence, which Russia could have been developing. It seems
that Putin's so-called resilient Russian economy is starting to show some serious cracks.
Sooner or later, the inevitable overheating of the military economy may not necessarily lead to its complete collapse, but rather to a very sharp and significant downturn. The general economic trends in the Russian Federation will also affect the military sector of the economy.
It would seem that, for the first time since 2022, salaries have started to fall at Russia's most important enterprises. And yes, we're talking about companies in the military-industrial complex.
Undoubtedly, lending to enterprises in the military-industrial complex has an impact. And the form and volume of this lending differ from those in the non-military sector. This was an advantage at first, but now it's become a disadvantage. Having essentially reached its peak, it's now either a plateau or a decline.
But how do staffing shortages and economic problems affect the expansion of Russia's military-industrial complex?
With the Russian economy's ability to supply the army, to provide military equipment and ammunition, those abilities are not limitless either. Moreover, even with rapid growth, the modern Russian economy may not reach Soviet-era levels.
Of course, sanctions are no joke, especially when they affect the condition and quality of your military equipment, or maybe even halt its new production altogether. But that's when Soviet-era tanks come to the rescue.
The focus was placed on restoring Soviet equipment. Old Soviet equipment taken out of storage, restoring ammunition, and again reworking and preparing it for combat. But those resources are not limitless either.
But now the time has come when old equipment doesn't make the job easier, but rather complicates it.
There are fewer and fewer units that can actually be repaired. They have to repair things that aren't really repairable, to take them apart, yes, and assemble working units from several others. This requires significantly more effort, work, and so on.
So instead of producing new and modern equipment, Russia is increasingly using old and worn-out machinery.
The production of new equipment is hindered, yes, including by sanctions, and also the unpreparedness of the production base. That's precisely why the significant ramp-up in the actual production of modern and advanced types of weaponry is nowhere near the necessary pace. Russia truly needs to adequately make up for its substantial losses on the battlefield. Consequently, they much prefer to fund what will deliver tangible and immediate results here and now, rather than tomorrow or even the day after that.
We shouldn't forget about Putin's loyal friends, China and Iran, who are actually helping them a great deal.
We have always been together, so we remain together even now.
But any delivery is more a way for Beijing to keep Moscow on a short leash.
It's precisely China's technological base that is helping the Russians stay afloat. At the same time, the Chinese are helping Moscow from the position of a suzerain. That's why they keep their hand on the tap. If Moscow acts the right way, they might open the tap.
But in the end, what do we have as of today? It is known that in 2024, Russia's military industry reached the limits of its capabilities. But what are Russia's prospects now?
There might very well be a so-called significant plateau, meaning that they have effectively reached their absolute maximum output capacity, and consequently they simply cannot grow any further beyond this point. However, they can certainly avoid any potential decline through carefully implemented administrative measures and strategic management.
The only question is, how long will the Kremlin be able to maintain this level? And could it turn out that an unexpected blow will come not from the front, but from within?
Corruption in Russia is our ally. The more the high-ranking generals and the powerful icebreakers, who are integral components of the vast Russian military-industrial complex, persistently engage in illicit activities and systematic corruption, the significantly diminished their prospects become for maintaining their strategic position and influence on this crucial plateau. At present, their widespread pilfering and misappropriation of resources are quite extensive, and regrettably, their insatiable appetites for further illicit gains and unchecked expansion continue to escalate with each passing year.
But of course, sanctions are only a small part of what can help Ukraine defend itself against the Russian Federation. Nevertheless, an important factor is also the increase in Ukrainian military production.
You can't just believe that sanctions will decide everything. In the same way, we need to develop power within our own ranks, which is what we're doing, and respond to strikes with strikes. This is one of the ways. Sanctions are just an alternative to weapons, but not a replacement for weapons.
Explosion at the front. Thousands of Indonesians are heading to Ukraine, while Russian mercenaries have already lost the ground beneath their feet. The Ukrainian armed forces are receiving reinforcements that force the enemy into chaos. This army is determined and relentless. Panic is spreading through Putin's ranks by the minute, and its historic move from foreign allies could change the entire game. Everyone is holding their breath in anticipation. First details, don't miss what's coming next.
Even more help and support. The Ukrainian armed forces may receive reinforcements to fight against the Russian occupiers. The president of Indonesia stated that he is ready to send peacekeepers to Ukraine under the auspices of the United Nations once the relevant decision is made by the UN.
We will continue to serve wherever defenders are needed for peace, not just with words, but with boots on the ground. If and when the UN Security Council and this General Assembly decide, Indonesia is ready to send 20,000 or even more of our sons and daughters to establish peace in Ukraine, in Gaza, in Sudan, in Libya, everywhere peace needs to be ensured.
This is accordingly a 20,000-strong contingent that Indonesia is prepared to send. It is not sufficient to monitor the situation along the entire length of the Russian-Ukrainian front. The length of the Russian-Ukrainian front currently exceeds 1,200 kilometers. Therefore, there is absolutely no compelling reason to speak of the overall effectiveness of a particular peacekeeping mission, specifically a substantial contingent of up to 20,000 dedicated personnel. This would be nothing more than a monitoring mission.
Earlier, the president of the UN General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, stated that she does not rule out the possibility of deploying UN peacekeeping forces in Ukraine to maintain the ceasefire and support post-war recovery if the majority of member states agree to it.
To organize a peacekeeping mission under the auspices of NATO, several stages must be completed. The first is the familiarization stage, when UN representatives travel to the country and acquaint themselves with the military, economic, political, and religious aspects of the territory where a peacekeeping mission might be deployed. But most importantly, to deploy a peacekeeping mission under the auspices of the UN, the consent of both sides of the conflict is required. That is, not only Ukraine, but also the Russian Federation. And this is essentially a stumbling block, a dead end. For a UN peacekeeping mandate, budget approval is required. Again, the Russian Federation is one of the main sponsors of the United Nations. To say that they would be interested accordingly in financing a peacekeeping operation from the Russian Federation's budget is not true. That does not reflect reality.
Let us recall that on September 4th in Paris, a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing took place with the participation of President Zelensky, where possible future security guarantees for Ukraine were discussed, aimed at ensuring a just and lasting peace. 26 countries have officially agreed to form support forces which are to be deployed in Ukraine immediately after a ceasefire is established. As part of this plan, 2 separate ground groups will be created.
NATO military personnel on the territory of Ukraine will be regarded by the Russian Federation as that country's participation in hostilities on the side of Ukraine. Accordingly, the Russian Federation will declare the legitimacy of military targets at the moment of the physical elimination of these servicemen.
Meanwhile, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has already threatened that any European military contingents in Ukraine will become legitimate targets for Putin's army. The horse's head noted that their presence in Ukraine will be regarded by Russia as the occupation of the country by the West. He also added that the Russian Federation will not pay attention to the peacekeepers' flag.
The Russian Federation is categorically opposed to the deployment of any foreign military contingent on the territory of Ukraine. This is essentially a cornerstone, a Rubicon that they cannot cross. And accordingly, these discussions about the possibility of deploying a peacekeeping contingent are merely political posturing, a statement not backed by concrete actions. Everything depends on the position of the Russian Federation.
But all of this is just a prospect for now. Whether Western international partners will actually send their peacekeeping forces to the region remains a very open and significant question.
Crimea is now unarmored. Russia's defense and fortifications are collapsing. A quiet, surgical Ukrainian operation is forcing the occupiers out of the peninsula. The Kremlin is already wailing. They're hanging on by a thread. The final strike is coming soon and Crimea will be cut off from Russia. Who's under the hail of fire? The FSB, enemy units, and maybe even the ringleader of the Kremlin circus. Shocking footage and the details, watch next.
The Russians are having obvious problems in Crimea. And the further it goes, the more surprises await the enemy.
The Crimea is gradually, if we draw an analogy, thanks to the Ukrainian defense forces turning into, something like Kremlin. By analogy with Chernobyl, yes, where the Russian army, Russian occupiers, and accordingly their weapons and equipment are constantly being destroyed.
Ukrainian defenders have a clear understanding of where the Russian occupiers are located in occupied Crimea and are doing everything possible to drive them out.
There is active work being done in Crimea. The process of demilitarizing Crimea is ongoing. This is an integral part of the deoccupation process.
In temporarily occupied Crimea, there are increasing problems with fuel, water, and military equipment. Ukrainian strikes are destroying enemy bases, while the Russians are trying to conceal the scale of their losses. We are talking about ground, air, and naval operations that our defenders are successfully carrying out.
Today, the Russian military facilities in Crimea that came under attack, let me emphasize military facilities, pose a threat not only to the peninsula itself, because they are located there, but also directly threaten other regions of our country. This critical equipment is currently being actively used to launch devastating missile strikes on our sovereign territory, and accordingly, it is precisely what enables the Russians to conduct extensive and thorough reconnaissance of our valuable airspace.
Enemy air defense facilities are being regularly eliminated, naval targets are being destroyed, and ground targets, including railways, are being struck.
The air defense systems in Crimea, which are currently operating very actively and trying to repel strikes from Ukrainian defense forces, are not succeeding at all. They are also being used as weapons of murder.
Problems with supplies are growing on the peninsula, and the Russians' defensive positions are collapsing.
Work is also underway on those key points that will open the door to Crimea for us, in particular the Kinburn Spit, the Dendrovskaya Spit, and of course the territory of Crimea itself.
Almost every week, the destruction of Russian helicopters or air defense elements is recorded. This creates an atmosphere of fear among the occupiers and forces them to conserve resources. Ukrainian drones have even reached the government dakas. On the night of September 22nd, explosions were heard in the Foros area. Russian collaborators reported that drones struck the territory of the Foros sanatorium. It was reported that 3 people were killed and 16 were injured.
It is quite likely that this very guest house was the meeting place for, high-ranking officials, possibly from the FSB or quite possibly from the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Yes, we still have not seen any objective verification, so-called, from the Russian side regarding the dead or wounded civilians. And that would be the first thing the Russian Federation would do if that were actually the case.
The Russians kept silent about the fact that at the time of the attack, there were very important guests in the sanatorium. Exactly who they were is not specified. A post on the sanatorium's social media page announced that on September 21st, the Foros Hall restaurant would be closed for special service. All the news shows focus specifically on the school located nearby.
The school's assembly hall suffered the most damage. Here, part of the ceiling has collapsed. Just look at what's left of one of the walls. From the damage, it's clear that the drone flew in through this window. Now, there are fragments scattered everywhere here.
The Russians tried to use this school for propaganda purposes, even though it was closed on the weekend, with no students or anyone else there, to cover up yet another of their terrorist attacks on our country. This is what the Russians always do. But again, it's not actually about the school being hit, it's about the boarding house with the same name, Terletsky, which is located across from the school.
Nearby is also government dacha number 11, the Zarya facility. There's a helicopter pad here, so FSO officers are always present and can be brought in to secure meetings.
We are demonstrating that today, our defense forces, using various means of firepower, can reach the occupiers anywhere in our Crimea, anywhere, north, south, west, or east. And today, there is not a single facility in Crimea that cannot be struck by our defense forces. Once again, Russian air defense has proven its ineffectiveness. They are incapable of protecting either Russia or the temporarily occupied territories. In other words, Crimea's air defense system is being destroyed, and this is the path to the demilitarization of Crimea, and most importantly, is the occupation. We are on the right track.
The Russian aircraft fleet on the occupied peninsula has been reduced as a result of the successful combat operations of the Ukrainian GUR special unit, Ghosts. 3 enemy Mi-8 multi-purpose helicopters were hit, as well as the expensive Russian radar station Nebo-U.
4 helicopters have been destroyed in just a few days, along with 2 unique amphibious aircraft, the B-12 Chaika. There are actually very few of them in the Black Sea Fleet, If I'm not mistaken, only 6. 2 of them have already been destroyed.
The diligent scouts meticulously showed compelling footage of the entire operation and a detailed video of the devastating wreckage of one of the destroyed military helicopters. Occupied Crimea has become a symbol of the fuel collapse. It was here that large amounts of fuel were brought in to supply Russian military equipment. As a result, the peninsula is now facing a shortage and record high fuel prices. The rise in gasoline prices is linked to Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil refineries. The video shows Sevastopol. In Yalta, gasoline was delivered to one of the gas stations. The line of people wanting to refuel is simply enormous. Neither the Russian authorities nor the occupation authorities in Crimea acknowledge the problem. They insist that it's merely a matter of logistics. Instances of human rights violations in Crimea are regularly documented and submitted to the UN Human Rights Council and the OSCE. The Russian occupation administration is forcibly conscripting Crimeans into the ranks of the Russian armed forces. Refusal to serve is punishable by criminal prosecution. In addition, there is ongoing militarization of children. Crimea is currently waiting to return to its rightful place, and Ukraine is absolutely not allowing Russia to normalize the ongoing illegal occupation of its territory.
At this moment, that's all from me, Maria Farafonova. Even more hellish Frontline news in our next episode. But for now, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you soon!